Here's a technique called French binding. It's a great technique to finish the edge and make it look clean and polished. Let's get started. I'm binding this raw edge of a sample card, and the corner has been rounded. The binding is the length of the sides getting bound, and it is 1 inch wide. I'm using a super thin, stretchy leather for the binding. And since this needs to be sewn, I'm using barge rubber cement. I will be using 2 different feet for this technique. The first one is 1/8 of an inch edge foot. It has a side or wall against one edge of the foot and helps you sew exactly 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. If you find that it's not working well or sticking, you can use a Teflon foot, a thin Teflon foot where the prong of the foot is 1/8 of an inch wide. That will work. And you just need to sew lining up the edge of your project with the edge of the Teflon foot. The other foot I'll be using is the zipper foot. And you can see it has just one prong and the hole is on the side that is facing the right. So I'll go ahead and start putting on the 1/8 of an inch edge foot, and I'm going to line up the edge of the binding with the edge of the sample card and get it nice and tight and close up against that little wall from the 1/8 inch edge foot. Do not use tape or glue to hold the binding in place. You can use binder clips if you don't feel comfortable just holding it in place with your hands. And you're just going to go ahead and sew the binding to the edge all around. And when you get to that rounded corner, just go slowly, and you want to try not to let the binding pleat. So you don't want like a big pinch or pleat on that rounded corner. You want it to be nice and smooth. Just take your time and go slow. This is something that you will get better with practice. Once the binding is successfully sewn to the edge, it's time for the next step, wrapping the binding over that edge. And here's where the gluing part comes in. So I'm using barge rubber cement. It's a contact cement, meaning it sticks to itself. So I have to first put glue on the back side of the binding. And I just want to brush it on in a thin layer. Don't put too much glue on there. And then the other part that will be glued is along the stitch line. If you can keep it just right along that stitch line, not as messy as I just did it, that is much better. Okay, hopefully you did a better job at putting glue on that back side along that stitch line than I did. Now we need to set it aside and let it dry completely. Meanwhile, I'll switch the feet on my machine. So here's the zipper foot. The hole is facing the machine, so it's on the right side. All right, the glue is dry. So now I want to wrap this around the edge really tight so there's no air bubbles or wrinkles in the binding. So smooth it up first before you wrap it over. And then once you get that done, then you can go ahead and bring the binding all the way over and making sure it's nice and tight. And in that rounded corner, you want to get rid of those pleats. So I like to take the awl, kind of drag it down and make them smaller. All right, now I'm ready to stitch in the ditch, as they say. So with that zipper foot on my machine, I am sewing as close to the binding as possible without actually stitching through the top of it. So you don't want any stitch lines going on top of your binding. You just want it right next to it, nice and close. Okay, now there's just one last step, and that is to get rid of that excess binding on the back side. So you can pull it up. Hopefully you were neater with your rubber cement than I was, and you can pull it up easily. And then you can just take a very sharp scissors, and cut off the edge of the binding. You want it nice and close to that stitch line without obviously cutting through that stitch line. All right, so now I am done with French binding on this sample card. Hopefully you enjoy doing this technique. Here's an example of French binding on the edge of a handbag. So this particular construction is called strip construction, and all around this outside edge I have used French binding to make it look nice and clean.